Welcome back to the Growth Hacking Culture podcast. Today, we are tackling a critical area that is rapidly evolving: how to move beyond gut instinct and make truly data-driven decisions about our most valuable asset, our people. Consider this. Studies have shown that companies leveraging people analytics are 82% more likely to have high impact uh, in talent outcomes and can see a 25% lower employee turnover rate. Yet, many organizations are still scratching the surface of what is possible. That's why I'm thrilled to welcome a true expert in the field, Cole Napper, author of the insightful book People Analytics: Using Data-Driven HR and Gen AI as a Business Asset. Cole brings a wealth of knowledge on how HR professionals can harness the power of data and the transformative potential of generative AI to unlock unprecedented levels of performance. Today, I'm really glad because, and I was mentioning to Cole just before, I have so many questions about this tagline that every tool out there is saying they are data driven and that they know all the secrets to understand people. And I have the impression that there is a lot of bullshit out there. Cole, you are going to help me today to understand what is the realities of this. And my first question, Cole, just to understand is this a really a big problem that many solutions claim data-driven and talent performance? Is it, or what is your opinion on that?
Well, I think you have to to separate marketing from, fact. And I think when people, if a marketing team uses the words data driven, they're not lying because I think you'd be hard pressed to find a software tool that doesn't have data on the back end. But that doesn't necessarily mean what it implies it to mean, which is that it's informing and making better data-driven decisions for HR teams internally. And that's actually that's a struggle because you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink, as kind of an American colloquialism, which means you can provide people with all the data that's necessary to make a data informed or a data driven decision, but you can't force them to make the decision. As
Hmm.
long as human beings are making the decisions, no tool can say yay or nay unless the tool is making algorithmic based decisions, which again, there is a lot of debate going on about how to do that ethically. Can you use generative AI to do it? Tools have been doing that for a long time, but within the legal frameworks of like high volume selection and assessment. But that's generally the tools that you're talking about aren't making those types of claims.
Mm. And one thing that I find quite impressive is that despite of the claims, sometimes there is no proof, not science behind to prove that works. Like you pay hundreds of thousands of dollars for a stupid survey about culture, and you don't know if it works or not. Nobody has really the proof to tell you it is working.
Well, I mean, I used to say often, like, the reason why I'm in people analytics and the reason why I had a successful career is because I just answered the simple question, which is, how do you know what you're doing is working? Right? And it sounds like that's really what you want all these technologies to provide, which is, how do you know what you're doing is working? And the reality is, people analytics teams aren't like, they are tasked to do that sometimes for tools, is to kind of prove that or justify if this tool has the efficacy that they say it does. But they also do it for a variety of HR initiatives or a variety of just business initiatives that exist in an organization to say, if we're doing this, how do we know if it's working or not? And do we have the evidence to support that in one way or another?
Hmm. To make it a little bit easier for the audience to understand, and maybe for HR professionals who are new to the concept of using data analytics,
Mhm.
what is what are the fundamental principles of people analytics that they should really understand?
I mean, I think it depends on how you define people analytics, which I find to be somewhat of a pedantic discussion. So the way I define it in the book is I say the generally accepted definition of people analytics defined by the people who do people analytics, which I know is a circular definition, but it just means I'm trying to play a get out of jail free card of the debate of what people analytics is. But for my own personal standpoint of what are the core foundations of people analytics is just using methods like science to determine if things have evidence to support them and should we do them or not. Now, you can expand upon that to say things like, does it have the ROI, so the finance behind why you're doing it? Or is it driving the outcomes that we want to see? Or is it related to employee productivity? Or is it related to culture? Is it related to employee sentiment? All of those different kind of areas that people analytics can focus in probably have a different tool set or skill set or system of mechanisms by which that you might measure something. But the core foundation is measurement is a fundamental good, and we should be doing it if we want to understand if what we're doing is having the intended impact.
This big question, sometimes it is the $1 million question for human resources about ROI. Um, what I have noticed is that in many organizations, they simply don't know how to calculate the ROI, or they ask the same person that is selling them the tool to calculate the ROI of that tool.
Yeah. They got the foxes guarding the hen house. I know.
Exactly. In your experience, what are some of the most significant ways people analytics can demonstrably add value to business?
I think there again, it's you can do this in a variety of ways, but one of the, like I think about things like high sample sizes and variation. And I know that sounds like a very kind of, esoteric type of answer, but let me explain. When you have high sample sizes, so if you work for a very large organization, chances are there are many, many roles in that organization that are called multi-incumbent, meaning that there's lots and lots of people that have the same role, maybe in one country, maybe even globally. When you have many, many people in a same role, if you make small changes, you can have a huge impact on the business just by nature of how many incumbents are in the position. The second area is variability. So regardless of whether a role has many incumbents in it or just one incumbent, but there's thousands of different roles, if you can measure the variation in a particular role and change someone from perhaps the average to one standard deviation above the mean in terms of productivity, again, that can have a huge impact on the business. And the real sweet spot is when you marry high volume roles with high variation, and can you bring about less variation but moving the typical bell curve of performance. If you can move standard performance to, again, just a few percentage points to the right or a few percentage points better in aggregate, that can mean, tens, if not hundreds, if not of millions of dollars or even billions of dollars for organizations.
Uh, I found it quite interesting because there is not so many books yet that talk about the impact of AI in people analytics. I say yet because I'm probably in the next year
They're
there is going to
coming.
be yeah, a bunch of them. What are some practical applications of AI beyond just automation that can significantly enhance human resources functions?
Yeah, I think again, my book is written. I mean, there's many different authors I've written about how AI is going to transform the HR function. I try to leave that question to somebody else because I want to focus particularly on people analytics. And so if I look at the people analytics function, and there's a famous Bill Gates quote that says people overestimate what they can accomplish in a year, but they underestimate what they can accomplish in 10 years. And I don't see a lot of the changes in AI happening in the next 6 months or a year. But if you look 10 years into the future, I think people analytics is a fundamentally transformed function that many of the things it does today, it will not do anymore. And so, what are some of those core things that I see transforming? I don't think that a human being 10 years from now is ever going to pull another report. I don't think they're ever going to build another dashboard. I don't think they're ever probably going to create another PowerPoint slide based on an analysis. And I don't think that they're ever going to pull another SQL query or manipulate data behind the scenes. I think all of that, and that's a very provocative, very controversial thing I said in the people analytics community. Because if you asked a normal analyst in a people analytics function what they do, it's all those things I described. And so what I'm saying is their job is going to fundamentally change, and generative AI is going to be at the core, or maybe even, what comes after generative AI is going to be at the core of transforming the people analytics function. So then the question is, what does people analytics do then? And And I can answer that question for you if you'd like, but I see people analytics fundamentally, it is three steps. If you boil down people analytics to its simplest form, it's three steps. It's asking a good question, it's analyzing the data about that question to answer it. And then once you have the answer, it's taking action based on the results in the real world to make a change, right? And so the way I look at it is the middle step of analysis is largely going to be automated using generative AI. So therefore, where should people analytics really be focusing its skills? It should be focusing on being embedded with the business to ask the right questions, and then again embedded with the business to take action based on the results to quantify the impact or the value of what they do. You know what people analytics is the worst at right now? Being embedded with the business.
Hmm.
And so my again, why I wrote the book and really the motivation behind it is to say this is a fundamental shift that's transforming in the market. This we know what's coming and where it's going, and here's how to get ahead of that. And here are the skills that you need to make the transformation to not just be a good people analytics function today, but a good function 2 years from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now.
So let's dream a little bit. So what you are saying inspires me to think that, in fact, is the relationship with data analytics is going to be conversational. That means that we ask questions the same way that we ask ChatGPT, and he will provide insights, like saying this type of population is suffering because of this reason. You can try this, this, and that
Yeah.
instead of today having a mega pivot table with Excel or Tableau having beautiful dashboards that nobody understands. And maybe even that we can have live streaming data coming because people can do inputs about their performance at any time.
I think you paint a very rosy picture. I have a little bit more cynical take, just having been an analyst. And so, what is a good analyst in my mind today? So, take generative AI out of the equation. What is a good analyst in my mind today? A good analyst takes a bad question and learns how to turn it into a good question and then answers the good question, right? A bad analyst takes a bad question and answers the bad question. You know what happens if generative AI is has the ability to scale things that previously weren't scaled. So, if you ask generative AI a bad question, it will scale a bad answer for you. That is a terrible, terrible outcome. So what you need, and again, this comes back to the first stage of analysis, is you need highly qualified people that can still translate bad questions into good questions so that then they can use generative AI to answer those good questions at scale. Does that make sense?
Yep, indeed. Now, there is and I think you talk also about it in your book about the ethics of using people analytics and AI. And I think this question, a lot of people do not care yet. They are using any tool at any time without asking themselves the question, is this tool biased or can it be manipulated or can it be the representation of our own human biases, which is
Yeah.
also a problem. So, what are the considerations that we should have concerning the ethics of the tool, the AI tool that we're doing that we're using? Is there any framework to use?
Yeah, there's lots of different frameworks, and I talk about that at length. You know, one of the things I use an example of is there's over 100 scientifically validated cognitive biases that have been discovered, and some of which are like they conflict with one another. And so to completely debias something is actually almost impossible. And so really what comes down to is judgment. Judgment is how you overcome bias, right? And so the other thing I would say is, yeah, perhaps the layperson isn't talking a lot about what's going on with generative AI and bias, but the people who are most in the know about AI are the ones who are the most concerned about this. And so again, I think that's why I focus on it heavily in the generative AI section of the book is if you're going to do this effectively, if you're going to take again bad questions and try to turn them into good questions, you have to be aware of some of these things and be able to make those transformations. the last thing I'll say, and this is really the theme of the whole chapter I wrote on ethics and AI, is because I'm writing this again to people who are doing people analytics, people who are builders, people who want to do this themselves. And what I tell them is don't build the future you don't want to live in.
Hmm.
And I think because a lot of people try to kind of piecemeal ethics down to like, well, don't do this one thing or don't do this other thing or this bias exists. So make sure that you create some kind of like statistical correction to correct for the bias or like very, very esoteric type of recommendations. And I want to make a generalized macro recommendation, which is if you don't want to live in a certain world, don't build that world because chances are none of us want to live in that world either.
Hmm. There is another challenge, and that's one of the reasons why maybe analytics hasn't in HR hasn't progressed as much as we wish, is that the human resources function has been very conservative with new tools.
Sure.
Uh, and again, with AI, is the same.
Hmm.
When there has been a couple of surveys showing that HR again is lagging behind. Is there any recommendation that you would give to HR people to start moving their asses, basically?
Again, another macro level recommendation that I make, and I find that I'm one of the few people who's saying things like this, and so it's surprising me because all this seems logical to me. It seems like when a new tool comes along, everybody always goes to the most creepy use cases to be like the first ones they try out. That makes no sense to me. I'm like, why would you do that? Right? And so what I always think about is what are the things that, again, people analytics or more broadly in HR, what are the most transactional, pedantic, repetitive things that we do the most that add the least value? Why don't we start there? Why don't we just try to take the 80% of the work that no human being should have ever had to do and have a machine do it for the first time? Wouldn't that be great? Right? And again, it's actually it's a really hard problem to solve. I'm not saying it's easy, but if you systematically try to deconstruct the different parts of an HR job or a people analytics job or the technology that exists, and you try to reconstruct it with how generative AI could augment or at least automate some of those components, that's a great future. And that's where I think we should really be focusing our efforts. And frankly, to our discussion from before, that's where a huge amount of ROI exists. You know where ROI doesn't exist? Getting sued for doing something super creepy. That does no ROI exists there, right? So I don't know why we have this tendency to always start there. That's not where I personally want to start.
And what is crazy is that you have mentioned that things that are related to the job, if we consider the amount of time that I, I remember only the data, some statistics about the time that human resources people spend in manual work, like
Mhm.
combining Excels with whatever SAP is providing and transforming it into salaries or wages or calculations. Back in the days of pre-COVID, it was around 60% of the time. And suddenly during COVID, they had to do even more to work about on culture, on people and employee experience, and many things that they didn't have the time back then to accommodate because they had so many manual procedures. And today it is the time to change this paradigm so that they can focus more on the real impact on business.
Yeah. Well, here's the scary part. What if they actually do get all that free time? Right? Right? Like because I think what you might actually find is they don't have as much impact on the business with that free time as you think. And so sometimes the worst thing that can happen to you is getting exactly what you want. And so again, this is why I wrote the book is to say, okay, you're going to get a bunch of your time freed up. What are you going to do with that time? And being very, very prescriptive to say, here, like what I did is I literally went through every component that I could think of that people analytics does. And I said, first of all, here's how I think you should be doing it today. And largely, I don't see people analytics functions doing this. So here's how you can improve already. And then here's how using generative AI, again, this is going to be a multi-year process, but using generative AI, you can make it even better over the next few years. And I go, program by program, discipline by discipline, throughout everything that I could think of that people analytics does to say, here's how to do it well today, and here's how you can do it better in the future. And so that people aren't left with this equation, which is, okay, you automated 80% of my job over here. Now the 20% becomes 100% of my job. What do I do now? And I try to answer that question in a very robust manner.
Cole, you got me interested about your personal journey. Um,
Why?
why? Because if I remember correctly, I read that you studied the typical human resources path. You studied psychology, something like
Mhm.
that, and you have a doctorate also. But so for me, it's like the typical human resources path, and suddenly you are the type of guy who's speaking numbers, statistics, technology,
Yeah.
science. How did it happen? You were not
I mean, I
supposed
can give you the short version if you're going all the way back to psychology and what I studied in school is, and I think most people who study psychology fall victim to this, which I think psychology is going to be all like, I don't know, maybe studying Freud or maybe you want to be a therapist or something like that. And then you get into it and you realize all psychology is research, statistics, science, and data, right? That's all it is. It's all just data crunching and doing research and studying it. And so if you go and get a undergrad, a master's, and a PhD like I did, you have years and years of doing data analysis. And so upon entering the workforce, then what's surprising is you realize how few people out there have that background or that mindset or
did.
that skill set to be able to go in and look at the world through that prism. And so what I found is, and I frankly I kind of lucked into this, is I graduated into a world that had a huge demand for that skill set, and I just kind of rode the wave of that demand to be able to use it effectively on the job.
Usually, and I think it was my daughter who mentioned it. So bad people in math do psychology, and I think she's wrong.
Yeah, I don't know.
Um, the in your book also you mentioned you provide a step-by-step advice on analyzing people data. Uh,
Yep.
do you have like an example of how even relatively simple data analysis can lead to significant impact in business performance?
Yeah. I think what let me kind of take a step back on this and say I think science itself has a fundamental misinterpreted brand. I think people think that the hard part of science is like all the data analysis and the research and all the things that go into it. You know what science boils down to? It's very simple. It's a control group versus an experimental group. You know what that is? In the real world, that's a bar chart with two bars on it. It's super easy to do. Now, you can do a bunch of statistics behind the scenes to validate or invalidate whether there's statistically significant differences between a control group or an experimental group, and that does require a lot of knowledge and skills. But in reality, the visualization of it is incredibly simple and to the point that any third grader could understand it. And so, what I say is, if you really want to understand how your business is working, all you need is more of the methodology of saying, how do I construct the right experiment, quasi experiment, natural experiment to look at the data or try to make predictions in the workforce, trying to create, a future baseline of what that we might compare ourselves against to say, how would we know what we're doing is working? Right. And I know I keep coming back to that point, but the reality is if you want to know how what you're doing is working, you have to have a point of comparison, right? And all you need, you can have many points of comparison if you'd like. That's called benchmarking. But if you want to have one, a control group versus an experimental group, guess what? That's a really time-tested way of going about trying to understand what is reality and what's just, I guess to the point from earlier, what's marketing.
Indeed. There was also some other good examples that you give in your book.
Mhm.
Um, from companies like Toyota and PepsiCo. And I wanted to understand what are some some of the key takeaways from these case studies that you mentioned that illustrate the power of people analytics in different organizational contexts? Because, yeah, the context of Toyota and PepsiCo are completely different, and also the culture, right?
Well, to be clear, those are some of my prior employers, both of which I have non-disclosure agreements, and I want to be very clear, I have not violated any non-disclosure agreements as a part of this book. What I did do is I had, I don't know, probably somewhere between 30 and 40 different case studies with different people that have interviewed from their organizations. And so what we went through is examples that they shared of what they've done in their organizations as well. One of the things that I'll say that came from a prior employer and something I've been noodling on a lot is, are people analytics teams willing to be accountable for the results? And so I put forward this kind of provocative question, which again I've utilized in prior employers to say, do you know of anyone who's made $1 million commitment as a part of their OKRs, KPIs, what have you, on an annual basis to say that our team is going to make $1 million of ROI for a business every year? I've spoken at conferences, I've asked this question to thousands of people. I've never had a single person raise their hand and say, yes, this is something that I was doing. And the reality is, that's the kind of thing that I'm saying we should be prescribing to do. And I go through again, the book has three sections. The first section is how to generate tangible business value. So it's all about how to generate ROI and why we should be making these type of commitments and have accountability to our results. Because I think as an analytical field, we're surprisingly unanalytical about how we assess our own performance. And I think we should be just as analytical about how we do that as we assess the performance of others. But the second section is about generative AI. And then the last section is about how to use generative AI and everything we know for how to win for organizations as we look towards the future. And so it's just basically a three-step playbook for how to go about using these new techniques or old techniques, frankly, for how to do business effectively using generative AI. And I give plenty of real world examples from, again, between 30 and 40 different organizations of how to do this effectively, representative of both the private sector, the public sector, and academia.
Hmm. I don't feel like the book is made only for human resources people or human resources people in analytics. I think that people in digitalization, change management can benefit drastically into of reading this book, People Analytics Using Data-Driven HR and Gen AI as a Business Asset. By the way, it is already in my wish list of in Amazon, and the book is ready for pre-order, right,
Correct.
Paul?
The book comes out August 26th of 2025, in case you're listening to this in future years. But yeah, it's available anywhere that you can find books online for pre-order, and will, be shipped on August 26th. And I think you're based in Europe. I think it actually comes out in the beginning of August in Europe, so you'll get it a little bit earlier than some of our US counterparts.
Okay, but yeah, the problem is, I put it in my wish list because I use Amazon.com, but now I should consider the Amazon UK or DE, the German
Mm-hmm.
one. Listen, Cole, it has been really interesting. You have made me reflect quite a lot about this conversation with my 14 years old daughter, who has a lot of opinions because she believes that she will be a good engineer. And but I told her that, and because reading when I look at people who have who is progressing in different areas, like I remember reading some books related to the life of the Berkshire Foundation, and these guys, they understand human psychology, they understand philosophy, the way of thinking, they
Mm-hmm.
understand numbers. I mean, psychology is a function that can be part of a complement and make it better whenever you are an engineer, a science person, or whatsoever. And I think this is in fact the conversation that I had with my daughter, that knowing psychology today is a must in anything that she will decide to to study in the future. She's just 14, but she believes already in being in an engineer or mathematician.
Yeah. Well, I think it sounds like between the things that she's choosing, she can't go wrong. So, keep encouraging her to do well.
Cole, is there any way that for people to reach you out if they want to ask you questions, they want to know more about what you do, or they want your support in people analytics or a good tip, how can they reach you out?
Sure. You can find me on LinkedIn just like everybody else, Cole Napper. I also, if you're curious, have a podcast called Directionally Correct where we talk about people analytics all the time. And again, that's where a lot of those interviews and case studies came from the podcast. A newsletter that's under the same name, Directionally Correct. And in my day job, I work at a company called Lightcast. I'm the VP of Research, Innovation, and Talent Insights. And you can look me up there as well. And yeah, thanks for having me, Ivan.
It is a pleasure, Cole. Thank you very much for making the time. It was lovely and enlightening to spend time with you. Thank you, Cole.
Thank you.